So why don't we just have a long, convoluted conversation about the pretentiousness of art? Hey everybody, welcome back to It's Too Late to Apologize Book Reviews. I'm Stella, and today we're going to be talking about The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. The Goldfinch was published in 2013 and won the Pulitzer Prize in 2014. It's a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age story. This novel tells the story of Theodore Decker and opens in Amsterdam. Theo's been holed up in his hotel room for a week in a haze of drugs, alcohol, and epic paranoia. He is suspiciously anxious about the fact that an American has been murdered in town. Theo laments that he never had a chance in life, that the tragedy that happened to him as a child doomed him to his current calamity, even though he admits it was his actions that led him to this place. So, he goes to the beginning and tells us his story as a 13-year-old boy whose mother is killed in a terrorist bombing he survives. The attack takes place while he and his mother visit the Met to see one of his mother's favorite paintings, and while Theo wanders deliriously through the wreckage afterwards, he takes that precious painting with him. The Goldfinch, painted by Karel Fabricius. Theo is alone and in shock after the incident, but soon goes to live with the family of a wealthy school friend. But Theo struggles to deal with the post-traumatic stress of the terrorist attack, the yearning for his dead mother, the changing of his entire world, his inability to control any of it, and to form honest relationships with anybody he knows. This is a contemporary novel, so I'll try to avoid any spoilers so I don't ruin this book for anyone who hasn't read it yet. Theo goes through his life, hiding his grief and shame and addictions from others in an attempt to make everyone else comfortable at the expense of himself. He doesn't confront, he hides. And in this way, the painting becomes the representation of both his mother and his sorrow. He at one point stores the painting in a facility where it's wrapped in pillowcases and tape and hermetically sealed away from his life. He has literally and metaphorically buried this trauma, and he refuses to even look at it. His suffering is something he will not talk about, but it is something he feels deeply responsible for. He feels responsible for his mother's death, but also for the painting. There is this situation in Vegas where we see that his mother is still protecting and caring for him well after she has died. And so Theo also turns his purpose in life to protecting the painting and the memory of his mother. At different points of the novel, we see how people embody the painting, the goldfinch. The goldfinch is a captive, chained to its perch, unable to be free of its situation. The painting also represents something beautiful and precious that a person is willing to protect at any emotional or financial cost to themselves. Theo's mother is the goldfinch, but so is Pippa, and Hobby, and Welty, and Theo, and Mrs. Barber, and even Popper, or as Boris would like to say, Popchik. And in this way, Tartt examines the value of art and people throughout the novel. Both people and art are paradoxes, or as Albert Camus, who is quoted at the beginning of chapter 1, would say, absurdities. And the absurd is that a stolen masterwork cannot be sold, and by merely having it in your possession, it puts you in danger. But the presence of that masterpiece in Theo's life is almost a spiritual experience for him. It is something so intimate and profound in a life of quiet suffering and awful burden. Theo derives his aesthetic values from his mother and from Hobby. We see that a simple painting can purely be beautiful without having any financial or historical value, just like Hobby's Frankenstein furniture he creates. Do you see what Tartt is doing here? Oh, Tartt, you sly popchick, you. How one values the art in one's life signifies many of the important elements in one's life, but especially love. We also see the themes of neglect, abuse, addiction, and vulnerability happening to all walks of life, to the rich, the poor, and the middle class. The painting and the people who come to be valued as the painting is are about more than just appearances. There is also a theme of associating the value of something based on the appearance and how we can be fooled by this. The value of something is based on what the buyer is willing to pay for that thing, and this is symbolized by the necklace and by those that buy antiques from Theo. There is an exploration of the impermanence of both life and of the comforts that one clings to. The themes of love, in its many forms, are integral here. Love lost, love betrayed, love thwarted, and love unrequited, but also of compassionate love, and intimate but platonic love also. Theo's in love with Pippa, but is afraid to ruin their friendship, as she is the only person who has been through exactly what he has. And his relationship with Kitsy, while not passionate, is compassionately understanding of each other's loneliness and gives each other something and somewhere to belong. And when Theo and Boris are so malnourished for love that is not violent or cruel, they express their affection for each other in unguarded moments with heartfelt honesty and intimacy that transcends romance. This is a form of plutonic masculine love that surpasses any kind of sexual attraction, because that's not what it was ever about. Their relationship was forged between two boys who were starving for any love, meaning, and hope in their lives, and they found that in their friendship. There is this uncertainty between adolescence and maturity that Tartt is exploring again, like she did in The Little Friend, and to a lesser degree in The Secret History. Theo is forced to mature early because of tragedy and violence. His survival tactic is to seem well-adjusted so that the Barbers will accept him and adopt him. And he and Boris launch themselves into an adult world of alcohol and drug abuse in an act of childish rebellion. And Pippa's arrested development and forced maturity also shows how her limitations were forced on her, as they were on Theo and Boris as well. But I tell you, what I find interesting about the Goldfinch, and the reason I wanted to talk about it, is the question of whether or not it deserved the Pulitzer Prize in 2014. Is it art or is it entertainment? And the Vanity Fair piece titled, "It's Tart, but is it art?" asks the reader this question. Many critics say that the fact that the Goldfinch won the award is a sign that literature is dying, and are shocked that it was so well received by readers. In that Vanity Fair article, it said, and I quote, "It's also gotten some of the severest pans in memory from the country's most important critics, and sparked a full-on debate in which the naysayers believe that nothing less is at stake than the future of reading itself." End quote. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds a bit dramatic to me. But it's a defining question that separates many readers when talking about this novel. What quality of novel is it? You might not have liked this novel, or even finished it. But those who did finish it, and even those that liked it, have to contend with the idea of whether or not this novel has deserved the awards and praise it has received, but also if it deserves the criticism. And it's not to say that all books or readers need to think about how their reading tastes rank in the literary hierarchy of the world. Actually, I recommend not worrying about it all that much. But I think it's a particularly interesting thing to think about, since this book was awarded the Pulitzer, and that the novel itself is about art and coveting beauty. It's a notion I've struggled to define myself. This aesthetic debate between what some may call high and lowbrow. What is fine literature and what is tacky? There is this pretentious snobbery that divides and judges both the literature and the reader. But how does one define art from entertainment? Some may say that when aesthetic is more important than mass appeal and sales, that this is art. That art is about intention and creates a response in the audience. That entertainment is about artifice, and art about substance. Entertainment gives you a predictable pleasure, and that art leads to transformation. That art awakens you rather than just satisfying a craving. But can't one crave art? Of course, this might be the difference between depth and a superficial reaction. But the problem I have with these explanations is that art and entertainment are not exclusive to one another, and how each person interprets anything is different from anyone else. Are entertainment and art inclusive or exclusive of one another. This is something that I find intriguing about all of Donna Tartt's novels. They walk this vague line between genre and literary fiction. And I'm not one that believes genre fiction can't be art, or as deep and complex as literary fiction. But getting back to The Goldfinch. When I finished reading it, even though it had a much more positive and wrapped up ending than Tartt's other novels had, I found myself both swept away by the story, but also kind of disappointed by it. To be clear, I think Tartt is a talented and amazing writer. She takes 10 years or more to work on her novels, and I don't think things happen by accident in her stories or that she is a lazy writer by any means. But the disappointment I felt was due to what some might call cliché characters, cliched language, and a heavy-handedness I felt at the closing of the story. But what really intrigues me is that I didn't see any of those things happen in her other novels, which really made me stop and think about it. It makes me think that these were done on purpose in The Goldfinch. I think Tartt was intentionally cliché and heavy-handed. But why? Why? Why break fundamental writing 101 laws? Why? Lauren Stein, editor of the Paris Review, said, and I quote, "A book like The Goldfinch doesn't undo any clichés. It deals in them. It coats everything in a cozy patina of literary gentility. Nowadays, even the New York Times Book Review is afraid to say when a popular book is crap." End quote. Now, I said I agree that The Goldfinch was cliché in ways and was very heavy-handed in the wrap-up, but I think Tartt knowingly did it for a reason. In The Goldfinch, there is a sense that caring too much for objects or aesthetics can destroy you. And if you watched my review on The Secret History, you'll remember that I said that the dangers of dark academia were abstraction and dehumanization. And I think the same thing can apply to the potential pretentious snobbery involved with disseminating art. Theo is obsessed with the painting, and Welty was also obsessed with paintings. He would copy and paint different famous works, and his artworks were eventually lost to fire also, just as most of Karel Fabricius's paintings were also. Welty copied what he loved, and Hobby was obsessed with creating Frankenstein antiques which imitated the real things. Hobby quotes Picasso by saying, "Bad artists copy, good artists steal." So which is it that Tartt is doing with her clichés? Copying or stealing? A cliché is a phrase, opinion, or a character that is overused and can betray a lack of original thought. But so is any form of imitation. A writer, when forced to not use clichés, strays from the reality of what conversation actually sounds like. And while those imaginative descriptions and dialogue may be more creative, they are also not realistic. The majority of us don't know anyone who speaks the way characters do in most novels. And it's said that art should imitate life. And if that were true, clichés would be a part of the art. But it's frowned upon. But further along this idea of copying is that at the end of the novel, Theo finally confronts the idea that he is a copy of his father in many ways. He looks like him, has addiction issues with both substances and with illegal financial gains. He is also perpetually depressed, and no matter how good his situation is, he cannot seem to find any joy in it, just like his father. But through Boris, we see that Theo's father, and in turn Theo, aren't all bad or good, as no one is, or his art. Boris credits Theo's father for being one of the few father figures he had in his life. He sees Theo's father as kind and loving, which only exemplifies how lonely and brutal a life Boris experienced. Through Boris, we can see the good. We can see the hope. We can see Theo. And because Theo can finally let go of the painting and face his anxiety, he can finally tell Hobby about his secrets. And also the idea that nothing is permanent in an ever-changing world, but that through careful renovation and passion, that something mundane or mass-produced could be seen as a priceless antique, a cliche becomes art. We see that a simple painting or novel can purely be beautiful without having any financial or historical value, just like Hobby's Frankenstein furniture he creates. Do you see what Tartt is doing here? But included in this discussion about art, I think there are also artistic endeavors that are considered art because of context. But when that context is unknown or lost, the endeavor is no longer art. Yet on the other hand, there is art that needs no context. And this is an example of the art that is felt. There is a visceral impact to the viewer without knowing anything else but the work. And both of these forms can be entertaining in different ways to diverse audiences. For example, Malevich's Black Square. This is an iconic painting by Kazimir Malevich, but it's literally a black square on a white canvas. Wikipedia says, and I quote, "A plurality of art historians, curators, and critics refer to Black Square as one of the seminal works of modern art and of abstract art in the Western painterly tradition generally." Malevich declares the square a work of suprematism, a movement which he proclaimed, but which is associated almost exclusively with the work of Malevich. The movement harmonized with the ideological sentiments of the revolutionary communist government during the early days of the Soviet Union. Suprematism may be understood as a transitional phase in the evolution of Russian art, bridging the evolutionary gap between futurism and constructivism. End quote. When considering the other works of art by this artist, and then being confronted with this, one can see that something is being said here. There is intention here. One cannot see the simplicity of the square when referring to the past works of this artist and not see the intention. And so that's my argument with Tartt. When looking at The Secret History or The Little Friend, I think you can see the Goldfinch and the cliche and heavy-handedness as intentional. The black square, when considered in context, is art. But removed from context, I doubt anyone would call this a masterpiece. And there are many books that could fall into these categories as well. Without understanding the influences at the time, one can lose the artistic appreciation for the work. But even without that knowledge, certain works can still be art. Certain works speak to the individual without needing to be explained by the gatekeepers of fine literature or extensive knowledge of other works. And I find it interesting that in the novel, Theo and Hobby discuss literature. So Theo says, "My dad says Poe's a second-rate writer," I said. "That he's the Vincent Price of American letters. But I don't think that's fair." "No, it isn't," said Hobby, seriously, pouring himself a cup of tea. "Even if you don't like Poe, he invented the detective story and science fiction. In essence, he invented a huge part of the 20th century. I mean, honestly, I don't care as much for him as I did when I was a boy. But even if you don't like him, you can't dismiss him as a crank." So one may also argue that even if you don't like Tartt's writing, you can't dismiss her either. Is Tartt speaking directly to her critics? I mean, maybe. But after the cold reception The Little Friend received from readers, it's no wonder Tartt took a bit of a different approach for The Goldfinch, in my opinion. What this story has impressed upon me is that while the writing is a bit cliche in parts, the overall themes, and those themes parallel to how this work was received by critics, makes The Goldfinch so ironic and self-aware that in this context, I rank it above The Little Friend. But removed from that context, I'd rate The Little Friend better. But I really enjoyed the journey of reading this novel. It is the reader that must decide, is it art or is it entertainment? Or is it both? And does the level of art suffer for the entertainment experienced? And in the end, does it even matter? So what are your thoughts? Have you read The Goldfinch? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you think it deserved the Pulitzer? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like and subscribe so that more people can discover some great books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.